My ex-wife knocked on my door at 12 a.m., and when I opened it, she whispered, "I'm sorry, I'm not what you expected." But the answer I gave her made her cry in a way I never imagined possible. My name is Caleb Brooks, and 3 years ago, this woman sat across our kitchen table and called our marriage a ceiling. But now, here she was, standing on my porch in the November dark at 12 a.m., undone, trembling, and whispering an apology I waited 3 long years to hear. I was a man who built bridges for a living. Strong things, things meant to hold, things meant to bear weight without breaking. But the one thing I couldn't hold together was my own marriage to Serena, the brilliant, beautiful, relentlessly driven woman who chose her ambition over my heart and walked away without ever once looking back. I had every reason to be bitter, every reason to leave that door closed, every reason to let her stand in the cold and feel even a fraction of what she made me feel. But the man who opened that door at 12 a.m. was no longer the broken man she left behind. She expected anger. She expected coldness. She expected to find the same shattered husband she abandoned 3 years ago. But I was not what she expected either. And when she whispered those words, "I'm sorry, I'm not what you expected," something in her finally cracked wide open, because she had spent 3 years believing she knew exactly who I was. But she never really knew me at all. Let me take you back. Not to the divorce, not to the night she left, but to the Tuesday evening in March. 3 years ago, when Serena sat across our kitchen table with her hands folded and her face wearing the particular expression of a woman who had already decided and was now simply delivering the verdict. I remember the smell of that kitchen, garlic and rosemary from the dinner I had cooked. Candles I had lit because I still did things like that. Still tried, still showed up, still believed that the right atmosphere could somehow bridge the growing distance between us. I remember the sound of the refrigerator humming. I remember the way she didn't quite meet my eyes when she said it. "Caleb, I think we both know this isn't working." I sat very still. Not because I was calm, but because something in me already knew, had known for months, had felt it the way you feel a storm before it arrives. That particular heaviness in the air, that stillness that isn't peace, but is something pretending to be. "I need more space to grow," she said. "I feel like this marriage is a ceiling. A ceiling. I had loved this woman for 6 years, married her for 4. I had rearranged the quiet dreams of my own life to fit the enormous shape of hers, turned down a project in Seattle because she needed stability in Charlotte, skipped promotions that required travel because she needed me home, built my entire daily existence around the orbit of a woman who, it turned out, had never once adjusted her own orbit for me. And she sat across our candlelit kitchen table and called me a ceiling. I did not shout. I did not beg. I did not do any of the things a man does when the ground is falling out from under him. Because the ground had been falling for so long that I had quietly learned to fall with it. I just looked at her and said, very quietly, "All right, Serena." 2 words. That was all I had left. She moved out that weekend. Efficient. The way she was efficient about everything. 4 years of shared life, packed and redistributed in 72 hours. The divorce was finalized in 4 months. She reclaimed her maiden name before the ink was dry. And just like that, Serena Elaine Whitfield was gone. And I was alone in a house that still smelled like her perfume for weeks, no matter how many windows I opened. I will not romanticize what came next. The first month was the kind of dark that doesn't announce itself. It just settles. Like weather moving in so gradually, you don't realize until you're already inside it and the visibility is gone. I stopped cooking. There was no point setting a table for one, when every empty chair was an accusation. I ate standing over the kitchen counter. Cereal, leftovers from the office, whatever required the least decision-making. I went to work. I came home. I sat in rooms that echoed. My older brother Marcus called every other day. Marcus, who is 4 years older and 3 times louder, and the only person on earth who has never once allowed me to pretend I'm fine when I'm not. He drove down from Raleigh on the 3rd weekend and sat on my couch and said nothing for a long time. Then he said, You gave that woman everything, Cal. Everything. And she still wasn't satisfied. That is not a reflection of what you are. That is a reflection of what she couldn't receive. I heard him. But hearing something and believing it are two entirely different countries, and I was a long way from the border. What pulled me back, slowly, imperfectly, one Thursday at a time, was Dr. Raymond Okafor, a therapist Marcus found for me. A quiet, precise man with reading glasses he was always removing and replacing, and a particular talent for asking the one question you were most hoping to avoid. In our third session he asked me, "Caleb, when did you stop telling Serena what you needed?" I opened my mouth to answer, and realized I couldn't. Because the honest answer was, I was never sure she was listening. And somewhere along the way, I had decided that a man who kept asking for things that were never given was a man making himself pathetic. So I stopped asking. I just kept giving, and called it love. That, Dr. Okafor said, replacing his glasses, is what we need to talk about. We talked about it for a year and a half. Getting better looked nothing like the movies. It didn't look like a montage of sunrise runs and journal entries and suddenly being fine. It looked like running 3 miles in the rain, because being exhausted was better than being still. It looked like crying in a Home Depot parking lot over a set of curtains I was buying to replace the ones she had picked. It looked like calling Marcus at 2 a.m. not to say anything specific, just to hear another voice confirm that the world was still out there. But it also looked like this. Like the morning I woke up and realized I had slept through the night without dreaming about her. Like the Saturday I spent the entire day redesigning my backyard garden, hands in the dirt, completely absorbed, and went to bed satisfied. Like the Thursday session with Dr. Okafor, where I realized I had arrived with nothing urgent, no wound to unwrap, no crisis to process, just a man checking in. I repainted the house. Warm colors, burnt amber, deep sage, the kind of colors that hold you rather than impress you. I built bookshelves in the study I had always wanted, and never prioritized. I started cooking again, properly, because I remembered that I had always loved it, and had somewhere along the way surrendered even that, to the business of keeping a wife who didn't want to be kept. And 18 months after the divorce, I met Noelle. Noelle Jameson was a landscape architect with a quiet laugh and the extraordinary quality of saying exactly what she meant. She was not Serena, and I do not mean that as a comparison. I mean it as a description of an entirely different kind of warmth. Uncomplicated, present, the kind of woman who asked how your day was, and then actually listened to the answer. We were 6 months in, unhurried, building something honest. My life was not perfect, but it was mine, fully, peacefully, completely mine. Which is exactly when Serena knocked on my door at 12 a.m. I want you to understand what that knock felt like. I had been on the back porch. November night, cold and clear. The kind of sky that makes Charlotte look like it belongs in a painting. Tea, going cold in my hand. No particular thoughts, just the rare, earned luxury of a quiet mind that has done the work and arrived at rest. The knock came soft, hesitant. 3 small sounds against my front door, barely enough to carry. Like whoever was making them wasn't entirely sure they had the right. I set my tea down, walked through my amber-walled house, past my bookshelves, past the garden photos on the hallway wall, through the life I had rebuilt from the rubble of what she left. I opened the door, and the air left my body. Serena was standing on my porch in the November dark, and she was, there is no other word for it, shattered. Not dramatically, not with tears streaming and voice breaking the way people fall apart in films. Serena would never give herself that. She was shattered the way expensive, precise things shatter, quietly, in fine lines, still holding the shape, but irreparably cracked underneath. Her hair was loose. Her coat was thrown over what looked like a courtroom suit, like she had left somewhere fast and driven here before she could think herself out of it. Her eyes were red-rimmed and slightly wild, and carrying something I had genuinely never seen in them in 6 years. Fear. Not professional fear, not strategic fear, the raw, foundational kind. The fear of a person who has run out of ground. She looked at me standing in my own doorway, steady, present, unbroken, and I watched something move across her face that she immediately tried to control and couldn't. She swallowed. And then, barely above a whisper, she said, "I'm sorry to come here like this. I know it's late. I know I have no right." Her voice cracked on the last word. Just slightly. Just enough. "I'm sorry, Caleb." A breath. "I'm sorry I'm not what you expected." The November air moved between us, and I looked at this woman, this brilliant, beautiful, complicated woman who had called me a ceiling and walked away and taken 4 years of my life with her. And I felt something I was completely unprepared for. Not anger, not satisfaction, not the cold, righteous distance I had imagined I would feel if this moment ever came. I felt something that starts in the chest and moves outward. Something that has no agenda and keeps no score. I felt, God help me, compassion. And I opened the door wider. "Come inside, Serena," I said. 3 words. That was my answer. And those 3 quiet, unguarded, completely unexpected words, were what made her cry. Not because I was weak, not because I had forgotten what she did, but because she had driven to my door at 12 a.m. expecting a closed door and a cold face and the justified punishment of a man she had wronged. And instead, she found something she hadn't encountered in longer than she could remember. She found grace. And grace, when you have spent years believing you don't deserve it, is the most devastating thing in the world. She stood on my porch and she wept. Really wept. The kind that comes from somewhere below words. And I stood in my doorway and let her. Because some things cannot be rushed, and some moments ask only that you remain present inside them. The November wind moved through the trees. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked once and went quiet. And Serena Whitfield, the woman who had once called me a ceiling, stood in the cold outside the home I had rebuilt without her, and cried like a woman who had finally, after 3 years of running, stopped. But what had happened to her life in those 3 years that brought her to my door at midnight? And now that she was inside, sitting in the house she once left, looking at the man she once dismissed, what was she about to tell me? I made tea, not because tea fixes anything, not because it was the sophisticated or composed thing to do, but because my hands needed something to hold, and the kitchen needed something to do, and the silence between us needed something moving through it before either of us could speak. Serena sat at my kitchen table, the same table where she had ended us. I don't know if she realized it. I don't know if she sat down and felt the geometry of that particular cruelty, the specific coordinates of the chair, the exact angle of the light, the way the room still carried the memory of that March evening like a scar that had healed over but never fully disappeared. If she felt it, she didn't say so. She just sat with her hands wrapped around the mug I placed in front of her, staring into it like it contained something she was trying to read. Her coat still on, her hair still loose, her eyes still carrying that raw, scraped-open look of a woman who had spent everything she had just getting here. I sat across from her, and I waited. Because one thing 3 years and 18 months of Thursday sessions with Dr. Raymond Okafor had taught me was this: you cannot rush the moment when a person is finally ready to tell the truth. You can only stay present inside it and let them find their way there. Serena had never been good at being waited on. She was a woman of motion, of forward momentum, of filling every silence before it could ask anything of her. Silence, for Serena, had always been the enemy. But tonight she sat inside it. And when she finally spoke, her voice was smaller than I had ever heard it. "I lost my position at the firm," she said. I kept my face still. 3 weeks ago, they restructured the senior partnership, brought in an outside team, and eliminated 2 of the existing partner roles. She paused. Mine was one of them. I said nothing. I let it land. And before you think it, she looked up, and for just a moment, the old Serena flickered, defensive, preemptive, armored. It wasn't performance-related. My billing numbers were the highest in the department. It was political. Internal. The new managing partner and I had a history of disagreement, and he used the restructure to— She stopped herself, looked back down at the mug. "I'm doing it again," she said quietly. "Doing what?" "Explaining. Justifying. Making sure you know it wasn't my fault before I even finished the sentence." A long breath. "It's what I do. It's what I've always done." The refrigerator hummed. The clock on the wall marked the seconds with small, patient sounds. "There's more," she said. I waited. Donovan and I ended. 2 months ago. Donovan, the man she had begun seeing 8 months after our divorce was finalized. A litigation attorney, senior partner at a competing firm, the kind of man whose LinkedIn profile read like a highlight reel, and whose personal life, I had heard through mutual acquaintances, was considerably less curated. He was seeing someone else, Serena said. Had been for most of our relationship. "I found out the way you find out things. You should have seen coming. All at once. Completely. In a way that makes you wonder how you missed every single sign." She said it without drama. That was the most painful thing about it. The flatness of it. The way a woman who had once prosecuted complex cases with the precision of a surgeon now delivered the facts of her own undoing, like reading from a report she hadn't written but was somehow responsible for. "So, in the span of 60 days, she continued, "I lost my career, and the relationship I chose over—" She stopped. The unfinished sentence sat between us like something physical. I did not finish it for her. She needed to finish it herself. "Over us," she said finally. And the 2 words cost her something visible. I looked at this woman across my kitchen table. This woman I had loved so completely, and so unsuccessfully. This woman who had taken everything I offered and called it insufficient and walked toward something shinier and watched it dissolve in her hands. And I noticed something. I was not glad. I want to be honest with you about that, because I think honesty matters more than a satisfying story. There is a version of this moment that looks like justice. The woman who wronged you, reduced to exactly the circumstances your pain once wished on her. There is a version where the man sits back and feels the cold, clean satisfaction of a universe that has balanced its own books. I did not feel that. What I felt was something more complicated and more human than satisfaction. I felt the ache of watching someone suffer needlessly. I felt the particular sorrow of seeing a brilliant person dismantled not by their enemies, but by the specific blind spots they had refused, for years, to examine. I felt grief. Not for us. Not for what we were. But for her. For the version of Serena that had somewhere inside her always been capable of sitting at a kitchen table at 12 a.m. and telling the undefended truth, and had spent years burying that version under achievement and armor and forward momentum. "Serena," I said. She looked up. "Why here?" I asked. "Why my door? Tonight?" She held my gaze for a moment, then looked away, then, with visible effort, looked back. "Because," she said slowly, "I was sitting in my apartment tonight, my very expensive, very empty apartment, and I realized I had no one to call." The words fell into the kitchen like stones into still water. "I have colleagues. I have professional contacts. I have people who know my name and respect my record and would take my call at any hour if it meant a future favor." She paused. "But I realize tonight that I don't have anyone who knows me. Not actually. Not the way—" She stopped again. "Not the way you did," she finished. The clock marked the seconds. The tea steamed gently between us. And I sat across from the woman who had called me a ceiling and heard her say, in the quietest voice I had ever heard from her, that the life she had chosen over me had left her in a beautiful apartment with no one who actually knew her name the way I had known it. I should tell you what moved through me in that moment. It was not triumph. It was not tenderness of the romantic kind. Not the foolish, lurching hope of a man who mistakes a person's need for a person's transformation. It was something cleaner than either. It was clarity. Because here is what I had learned in 18 months of Thursday sessions. The thing Dr. Okafor had said in our final meeting, before he declared me, with characteristic understatement, sufficiently excavated. Caleb, the goal is not to stop caring about the people who hurt you. The goal is to care about them from a place of wholeness rather than from a place of wound. Those are two entirely different things. One keeps you trapped, the other sets you both free. I was caring about Serena from a place of wholeness now, and that was something she could feel. I could see it in her face, the way she kept looking at me, like she was searching for the bitterness she deserved, and finding something she didn't know how to categorize. "You're different," she said, not accusingly, almost wonderingly. "Yes," I said. "You're not angry." "No." "How?" And the question came out raw, genuinely bewildered. "Caleb, how are you not angry? I sat at this table and I called our marriage a ceiling. I walked out of this house and I built a life without you, and I never once called to ask if you were okay. How are you sitting there looking at me like—" Her voice broke slightly. "Like I matter? Like I'm worth a cup of tea at midnight?" How? I thought about that for a moment, not performing the pause, actually thinking. Because she deserved a real answer, not a rehearsed one. Because being angry at you was keeping me in that March evening, I said finally. And I refused to live in March for the rest of my life. She stared at me. "I did the work, Serena. Hard work, ugly work, the kind of work you can't bill hours for, and nobody applauds you for, and you can't put on a resume. I sat in a therapist's office every Thursday for a year and a half, and I took myself apart, and I figured out which parts of what happened were about you, and which parts were about me, and then I put myself back together differently. Better." I leaned forward slightly. "And somewhere in that process I forgave you. Not for your sake. I want to be honest about that. I forgave you for mine. Because you were living rent-free in a place inside me where I needed to live instead." The kitchen was very quiet. Serena's eyes were full. "I didn't deserve that," she whispered. "Your forgiveness. I never asked for it. I never apologized. I just left." "No," I agreed. "You didn't ask for it. But that's the thing about forgiveness, Serena. It's not actually about the person who receives it." And that was when the tears that had been sitting in her eyes since she arrived finally spilled over. Not the careful, controlled tears of a woman managing her presentation. Not the strategic tears of someone working an angle. Real ones. The kind that come from the place below the place you normally let anyone see. She pressed her fingers against her mouth and looked at the ceiling and breathed in the jagged, effortful way of someone trying to hold themselves together and losing the effort. And I sat across from her and did not look away, and did not rush her, and did not make it smaller than it was. Because it was not small. This was a woman who had spent her entire adult life in motion. Always the next case, the next win, the next rung, the next achievement. Finally, completely, utterly still. Finally sitting inside the consequences of her own choices without a strategy for exiting them. Finally face to face with the cost of the life she had chosen and the extraordinary, unearned grace of the man she had chosen it over. When she could speak again, she said something I did not expect. "I think I was afraid of you," she said. I said nothing. Waited. Not of you, specifically. Of what you represented. You were so steady, so sure of what mattered, so content with things I had been taught were not enough. She shook her head slowly. "My mother worked herself to the bone her whole life, trying to prove she was worth something to people who had already decided she wasn't. And I watched that, and I thought, I will never need anyone to validate me. I will be so successful, so accomplished, so completely self-sufficient that no one will ever have the power to make me feel small." She looked at me directly. "But you didn't make me feel small, Caleb. You made me feel seen. And I didn't know what to do with that. It terrified me. So I called it a ceiling and I ran." The clock on the wall. The refrigerator's quiet hum. The November wind pressing gently against the kitchen window. I sat with what she had just given me. The real story. The underneath story. The one that had been buried under 4 years of marriage and 3 years of silence. And I felt the final piece of something shift inside me. Not toward her, not away from her, just into place. "Serena," I said, "what do you need tonight? Not what do you want. Not what do you deserve. Not what happens next between us. Just what do you need? Right now. Tonight." She blinked, like the question was in a language she was only just learning. "I don't know," she admitted. And the admission itself seemed to cost and release something simultaneously. "That's okay," I said. "You don't have to know tonight." She looked around my kitchen, at the warm walls, at the bookshelves visible through the doorway, at the life assembled here with intention and care, and the hard-won peace of a man who had rebuilt himself from the foundation. "You made this beautiful," she said softly. "I made it mine," I said. She nodded slowly, understanding more than the words. Then she said, almost to herself, "I don't know what mine looks like anymore." And that sentence, quiet and undefended and more honest than anything she had said in 4 years of marriage, hung in the warm kitchen air between us. Outside, the November night pressed on. Inside, something was shifting. Not back to what we were. You cannot go back to what you were. The river never runs backwards. But towards something. Something neither of us had a name for yet. And maybe that was enough for tonight. Maybe tonight was only ever meant to be this. A knock on a door, a cup of tea, a kitchen table, and 2 people finally, after years of distance and damage and separate becoming, telling each other the truth. But here is what neither of us knew yet. What was waiting on the other side of that night was bigger than either of us had prepared for. Because tomorrow morning, something was going to happen that would force both of us to decide. Not with words, not with apologies, not with carefully constructed explanations, but with action, with choice, with the one currency that cannot be faked. What we were actually made of. She fell asleep on my couch. I didn't plan it. She didn't ask. It happened the way exhausted, broken things happen. Gradually, then all at once. One moment she was sitting upright, mug in hand, talking in that newly quiet voice I was still adjusting to. The next, her sentences were slowing, her eyes blinking longer between thoughts, her body finally surrendering to what the night had cost her. I got a blanket from the hall closet. The gray one, thick and warm. The one Marcus had given me the first Christmas after the divorce. Because he said, and I quote, "Every man healing alone needs at least one good blanket." I draped it over her without waking her. She didn't stir, just pulled it instinctively toward herself, the way people do when they are finally, truly safe enough to let go completely. I stood there for a moment in my own living room looking at this woman, Serena Elaine Whitfield. Brilliant, complicated, undone. Asleep on my couch at 12 a.m. under Marcus's blanket, still in her courtroom coat, her shoes still on, her face in sleep stripped of every layer of strategy and composure until all that remained was something startlingly unguarded. She looked, in that moment, like the woman I had fallen in love with before the achieving swallowed her. I turned off the living room lamp, went to my bedroom, lay on my back in the dark and stared at the ceiling for a long time. And somewhere between thinking and not thinking, between the past and wherever I was headed, I fell asleep too. I woke at 5:47 a.m. to the sound of my kitchen. Soft sounds, careful sounds. The sounds of someone trying not to be heard. Cabinet doors closed with deliberate gentleness. The quiet fill of a kettle. The careful placement of mugs on a counter. I lay still for a moment, orienting myself to the strangeness of it. Then I got up. She was standing at my stove in yesterday's clothes, her coat folded over the back of a kitchen chair, her hair pulled back with what looked like a hair tie she'd found in her coat pocket. She had found the tea, found the mugs, was heating water with the focused, slightly uncertain energy of someone doing the one useful thing available to them. She heard me in the doorway and turned. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then she said, "I found the Earl Grey. I hope that's okay." "It's okay," I said. I sat at the kitchen table, She brought 2 mugs and sat across from me. The early morning light was just beginning at the windows. That particular shade of gray-blue that belongs only to 6 a.m. in November. The color of the world before it has fully committed to the day. We sat with our tea, and the silence between us was different from last night's silence. Last night's silence had been loaded, careful, walking on glass. This silence was something else. It was almost comfortable. Almost. "I need to tell you something," Serena said. I looked at her over my mug. "I've been in therapy," she said, "for 4 months, since Donovan and I ended." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "My therapist's name is Dr. Patricia Wen. She is, without question, the most unsettling person I have ever encountered in a professional context." Despite everything, I almost smiled. She asked me, in our 3rd session, to make a list of every relationship in my life where I had prioritized achievement over connection. Serena paused. "It was a long list, Caleb. But your name was at the top." I said nothing. She asked me what I would say to you, if I could say anything without consequence, without agenda, just the truth. She looked down at her mug. I told her I wouldn't know where to start. A breath. She told me to start with the flower. The flower. Something moved through me, deep and quiet and old. "You remembered," I said. "I never forgot," she said. "The night I ended things. You had flour on your hands. You'd been baking cornbread for my mother's birthday, and I walked in and sat down and ended our marriage, and you set the spoon down so carefully and said, 'All right.' Serena and I," her voice caught, "I walked out of this house, and I told myself you'd be fine, because you were always fine. Because you were steady and strong, and Caleb Brooks always landed on his feet." She looked up at me. "But I knew," she said. "I knew even then that I was doing something I couldn't undo. And I did it anyway, because I was so convinced that what I was running toward was worth what I was running from." "Was it?" I asked. The question was not cruel. It was genuine. She held it for a moment. "No," she said simply. "It wasn't." The morning light was growing at the windows. Somewhere outside, a bird had begun its first conversation of the day. The neighborhood was waking. The distant sound of a car. The soft percussion of a morning beginning its ordinary business. "I'm not here to ask you to take me back," Serena said. I looked at her. "I want to be clear about that. I didn't come here last night with an agenda. I didn't come with a plan or a pitch or a strategy." The ghost of a self-aware smile crossed her face, which, if you know me at all, you understand is either a sign of genuine growth or complete psychological collapse. This time I did smile, and she saw it. And something in her face opened slightly at the sight of it. Like a window that hadn't been used in a long time, letting in air it had forgotten how to receive. "I came," she continued, "because last night I was sitting in my apartment and the silence got so loud I couldn't hear myself think. And I went through every name in my phone, every contact, every person I have built or maintained or curated a relationship with over the last 10 years. She shook her head slowly. "And the only person I could think of who would open the door, not because they owed me, not because of what I could do for them, but just because, was you." She set her mug down. And I hated that, at first. It frightened me, that after everything I chose and built and achieved, the one person I trusted to simply open a door was the one I had walked away from. "And now?" I asked. "Now," she said carefully, "I think it might be the most honest thing I've known about myself in years." The morning held us both, and I looked at Serena across my kitchen table in the early November light, and I made a decision. Not a romantic decision, not a strategic one, a human one. I was going to tell her the truth, all of it. "I'm seeing someone," I said. She absorbed it without flinching, nodded once, slowly. "Her name is Noelle. She's a landscape architect. She's kind and present, and she means what she says." I held Serena's gaze. "I care about her. She sounds wonderful," Serena said, and I looked for performance in it and found none. Just the quiet, genuine response of a woman learning to mean what she said. "She is," I said. A pause. "You deserve wonderful," Serena said. 3 words, simple, unadorned, and they landed differently than anything else she had said, because they carried in them, quietly, without announcement, the full weight of everything she hadn't said for 4 years of marriage. Every moment she had taken my steadiness for granted. Every dinner gone cold. Every weekend canceled. Every time she had looked at everything I offered and reached past it for something else. You deserve wonderful. I felt something finalize inside me. Not close. Finalize. Like a document that had been in draft for 3 years, suddenly, quietly, saving itself complete. So do you, I said. She looked at me. You deserve wonderful too, Serena. That's not nothing. That's not a small thing to finally understand about yourself. Her eyes filled again. But it has to be the right wonderful, I continued. Not the wonderful that looks impressive from the outside. Not the wonderful that fits the narrative you inherited from watching your mother survive. The kind that's built for the actual interior of your life. For who you actually are, when nobody's evaluating your performance. She pressed her lips together, held herself very still. You're going to have to figure out who that is, I said. And that work, that is yours to do. Nobody can do it for you. Not a relationship, not a title, not a corner office. I know, she whispered. Do you? The question was gentle, but it was real. She thought about it. Actually thought about it. The way she hadn't in the previous night's rawness. I'm starting to, she said finally. For the first time in my life, I think I'm actually starting to. At 7:15 a.m., my phone buzzed on the counter. Noelle, good morning. Thinking about you. Breakfast later? I looked at the message. Then I looked at Serena, who had seen the phone light up and was looking carefully at her tea, with the particular discretion of a woman giving you privacy she once never thought to offer. I typed back, good morning. Yes, I'll call you at 9. I set the phone down. Serena stood up. I should go, she said. She was right. She should. And the fact that she knew it, that she stood up without being asked, without angling for more, without the old Serena's instinct to press every advantage, told me more about her 4 months of Thursday sessions with the unsettling Dr. Patricia Wen than anything else she had said. She picked up her coat from the chair, put it on with the careful movements of someone returning to themselves after a long absence. I walked her to the front door. We stood in the doorway in the morning light, the same doorway where she had whispered her apology 8 hours ago, the same threshold between what had been and what was becoming. And for a moment, neither of us moved. Thank you, she said, for opening the door, for the tea, for, she searched for the word, for being who you are, even after everything. Especially after everything, I said. She almost smiled. It was the closest thing to the real smile, the one I had fallen in love with years ago, the one that appeared rarely and meant everything when it did. Take care of yourself, Caleb, she said. You too, Serena. She stepped off the porch, walked down the path through my garden, the garden I had planted with my own hands in the first summer after the divorce. Every bulb a small act of faith in a future I couldn't yet see. She walked through it in her November coat, and her yesterday's shoes, and her carefully rebuilt composure, and at the end of the path she turned once. Not with longing, not with regret, just to look, just to see. And then she walked to her car, got in, drove away. I stood in my doorway and watched until she turned the corner and disappeared. Then I stood there a little longer, just breathing, just present, just a man standing in his own doorway in the morning light, feeling the full extraordinary weight of a night that had asked everything of him, and finding, with something close to wonder, that he had had it to give. I called Marcus at 7:30. He answered on the second ring because Marcus always answers on the second ring, as if he sleeps with one ear already open for the people he loves. She came to my door last night, I said. Serena. Silence. Then, you okay? Yeah, I said. You sure? I thought about it. The real version of the question. Yeah, Marcus, I said. I actually am. I could hear him exhale. The specific exhale of an older brother who has been quietly terrified on your behalf for 3 years and is only now allowing himself to put it down. What happened? He asked. She needed someone to open a door, I said. So I opened it. And I found out I was exactly as healed as I thought I was. A pause. That's everything, Cal, Marcus said quietly. That's the whole thing right there. At 9 a.m., I called Noelle. She answered warm and unhurried, the way she always did, the way that had become one of my favorite sounds in recent months. "Hey you," she said. "Hey," I said. "I need to tell you something. About last night." "Okay," she said. No alarm. No preemptive defense. Just, "Okay. I'm here. Tell me." I told her everything. All of it. The knock at midnight, the kitchen table, the tea, the conversation, the blanket, the morning. I told her the way you tell things to a person you respect enough to give the whole truth to, even when pieces of it are complicated. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a brief, full silence. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Clear," I said. "I feel clear." "Good," she said. And I could hear in that single word that she meant it. Not the performance of a woman suppressing fear, but the genuine response of a person secure enough to meet honesty with honesty. "She's not a threat, Noelle," I said. "I want you to know that. Not because I'm telling you what you want to hear, but because it's true. Last night closed something. It didn't open anything." "I know," she said. "How do you know?" "Because you called me at 9, she said simply, "and told me everything." I sat with that. The beautiful, uncomplicated logic of a person who understood that trust is not a declaration, but a practice. A daily, specific, repeated choice. "Breakfast?" I said. "Breakfast," she said. "The place on Morrison with the good eggs." 20 minutes, I said. "I'll be there," she said. I want to tell you what I understood that morning. Not as a lesson. Not as a moral neatly packaged and delivered. Just as a man standing in his kitchen at 9 a.m. in November, coat on, keys in hand, about to walk out the door toward a woman who answered on the second ring and meant what she said. Here is what I understood. Healing is not the absence of feeling. It is not the death of caring or the construction of walls thick enough that nothing gets through. A man who feels nothing has not healed. He has simply numbed, and numbing is its own kind of prison, just a quieter one. Healing is the ability to feel everything. The old love, the old grief, the compassion for a person who hurt you, the strange tenderness of a midnight conversation that closes a chapter you didn't know was still open, and remain standing. Remain yourself. Return to your own life, not diminished by the feeling, but expanded by it. Serena had come to my door at 12 a.m., broken and afraid, and more honest than she had ever been in 4 years of marriage. And I had opened the door, not because I was a saint, not because what she did hadn't mattered, not because the flower on my hands that March evening hadn't cost me something I spent years rebuilding, but because the man I had become, the man built in therapy offices and morning runs and garden soil and Marcus's 2 a.m. phone calls and Noelle's quiet, genuine presence, that man was large enough to hold compassion for someone who had hurt him without losing himself in the holding. That is the whole story. That is all of it. Not the story of a man who won because his ex-wife came back broken. Not the story of a woman punished by a universe keeping score. Not a love story in the conventional sense. No reconciliation. No dramatic reunion. No Hollywood doorway kiss in the rain. Something better than all of that. The story of a man who built bridges for a living. And finally, after the hardest years of his life, built the most important one. The one back to himself. I walked out my front door into the November morning. The garden was still. The air was cold and clean. The kind of cold that makes the world feel exact. Every edge sharp. Every color true. Every breath a reminder that you are alive and present and exactly where you are. I walked down the path Serena had walked an hour ago, past the bulbs I had planted in grief and watered into something living. Through the gate, onto the sidewalk, into the morning, and I did not look back. Not because the past didn't matter, but because everything that mattered most was ahead. Some doors opened to let people back in. Some doors opened to finally let yourself out. Caleb Brooks opened his door at 12 a.m. and walked through his own at 9. That is the difference between a man who survives love and a man who learns from it. And that difference, quiet, unannounced, built in the dark, is everything.